I can still feel the weight of that Christmas dinner pressing on my chest. The dining room was warm, almost suffocating, filled with the smell of roasted turkey and the forced laughter of people trying too hard to pretend everything was fine. My sister Karen sat across from me, her smile tight as she passed the mashed potatoes. Uncle Jim made some joke about the weather, and everyone laughed on cue, but I could feel the tension underneath it all, coiling like a spring ready to snap. Michael sat at the far end of the table. Quiet, too quiet. He'd barely touched his food, just pushed the green beans around his plate with his fork. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, wanted to reach across all that distance between us and pull him back, but I knew better. Every time I tried to bridge that gap lately, he only pulled further away. "Ruth, this turkey is delicious," my mother said, her voice too bright, her eyes darting between Michael and me like she was watching for the first crack in the ice. "Thank you," I managed, though my throat felt tight. That's when Michael looked up. His eyes met mine, and I saw something there I hadn't seen before, something like determination mixed with sadness. He set down his fork carefully, deliberately, the way you might set down something fragile that you're about to break anyway. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something," he said. The whole table went still. Karen stopped mid-reach for the cranberry sauce. Uncle Jim's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "Can it wait until after dinner?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to maintain control of at least this one moment. "No," he said, not unkindly, but firm. "It can't wait anymore." I felt my face flush. Around the table, I could see them all watching, their expressions carefully neutral, but their eyes hungry for drama. Karen exchanged a glance with her husband. My mother's hand fluttered to her throat. "Michael, please," I said quietly, "not now." "When then?" His voice rose just slightly. "When are we ever going to talk about this? You've been controlling every part of my life for years, Mom. Every decision, every choice. I can't even go to the grocery store without you calling to ask what I'm buying." The words hit me like physical blows. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles going white. "I'm just trying to help you. I'm your mother. That's what mothers do. They protect their children." "I'm 23 years old," he said, and now there was something raw in his voice, something that made my heart crack. "I'm not a child anymore, and I need you to let me go." Silence crashed down on the room. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, the soft hiss of the heater, the sound of my own breathing too loud in my ears. I wanted to scream. I wanted to explain. I wanted to make them all understand that everything I'd done, every phone call, every question, every boundary I'd set, it was all because I loved him. Because I was terrified of losing him. But I couldn't find the words. I just sat there, frozen, feeling the judgment radiating from every corner of that dining room, feeling the years of trying so hard, caring so much, loving so fiercely, all crumbling to dust in my hands. Michael stood up slowly. "I'm going to go," he said. I need some space." I watched him leave, watched the door close behind him, and I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Around me, everyone started talking at once, their voices a blur of concern and criticism and barely concealed whispers. But all I could hear was the echo of his words. "I need you to let me go." How did I get here? How did love become control? How did protection turn into a prison? The morning after Christmas dinner, I woke before dawn. The house was silent, cold, empty in a way that had nothing to do with Michael being gone. I lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, feeling the exhaustion in my bones. It was more than physical tiredness. It was the kind of weariness that comes from carrying too much for too long. Finally, I pulled myself up and reached for my Bible on the nightstand. The worn leather cover felt familiar in my hands, comforting. I'd been reading the same Bible for 15 years, and the pages fell open naturally to passages I'd underlined years ago, verses I'd clung to in other dark times. My eyes fell on Matthew 11, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Rest. When was the last time I'd felt truly rested? When was the last time I'd slept through the night without waking up anxious, running through mental checklists of everything I needed to control, everyone I needed to protect? I read the words again, but they felt distant, like they were meant for someone else, someone who knew how to let go, someone who didn't lie awake at night, imagining all the terrible things that could happen if she stopped watching, stopped managing, stopped holding everything together with white-knuckled determination. Downstairs, I made coffee in the quiet kitchen. The morning light was gray and weak through the windows. I thought about calling Michael, but what would I say? I thought about texting him, but my fingers hovered over the phone screen, paralyzed. Every possible message felt wrong, too controlling, too apologetic, too desperate. I sat at the kitchen table alone, holding my coffee cup with both hands for warmth, and let myself remember. 5 years earlier, when Michael was still a teenager, everything felt different. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe I was already on this path even then, but I couldn't see it yet. It was a Sunday afternoon, and my siblings had come over after church. We were in the living room, and Michael had just told me he wanted to go to a party that night, a party where I knew there would be drinking, where I knew the parents wouldn't be home. "Absolutely not," I'd said, and I could hear the edge in my own voice, the fear disguised as authority. "Mom, everyone's going. I'll be the only one who's not there." "That's not my problem. You're not going." He'd looked at me with such frustration, such anger. But I'd held firm because I was protecting him, wasn't I? I was keeping him safe. My sister Karen had been sitting on the couch, watching us. After Michael stormed off to his room, she turned to me with this look sympathetic on the surface, but something else underneath. "You know, Ruth, you might want to ease up a little," she'd said softly. "He's growing up. He needs some freedom." "He's 17, I'd snapped. "He needs guidance. He needs boundaries." Karen had exchanged a glance with Jim. "Just be careful. You don't want to push him away." But I hadn't listened. I doubled down, set more rules, asked more questions, demanded more accountability, because that's what good mothers do, right? They protect, they guide. They don't just let their children walk into danger. Now, sitting in my cold kitchen 5 years later, I wondered if Karen had been right. If I'd been pushing Michael away all along, one protective rule at a time. 2 days later, at church, I felt the whispers before I heard them. You develop a sixth sense for that kind of thing when you've lived in the same small community for decades. The moment I walked into the foyer, I could feel the shift in energy, the way conversations paused just a beat too long when I approached. "Morning, Ruth," Linda said brightly, too brightly. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning," I replied, trying to sound normal, trying to pretend I couldn't feel the judgment radiating from every corner of that foyer. I moved toward the sanctuary, but caught a snippet of conversation behind me. "Did you hear about her son? I know, poor thing. But honestly, you can't control them like that and expect." I kept walking, my face burning, my heart hammering. These were my people, my church family, the community I'd loved and served for years. And now they were talking about me like I was some kind of cautionary tale, some example of what not to do. Inside the sanctuary, I found my usual seat near the back. The music had already started, but I couldn't focus on the words, couldn't lift my voice to sing. I just stood there, feeling exposed and alone in a room full of people who were supposed to love me, supposed to support me. Is the church a refuge or just another place where I have to perform? Can I be honest here without losing everything? The sermon was on forgiveness. Of course it was, and I felt every word like an accusation. But I couldn't forgive Michael for pulling away, couldn't forgive my family for judging me, couldn't even forgive myself for failing at the one thing I thought I was good at, being a mother. After service, I slipped out quickly, avoiding the fellowship time, avoiding the forced conversations and pitying looks. I just wanted to go home, to be alone with my exhaustion and my shame. But when I got to my car, Michael was there, leaning against the hood. My heart jumped. "Michael," I said, and I could hear the hope and fear warring in my own voice. "Hey, Mom." He looked tired, and something in my chest ached at the sight of him. "Can we talk? Just for a minute?" We walked together to my backyard, not speaking, just letting the late afternoon sun warm our faces. The winter grass crunched under our feet. A neighbor's wind chime sang somewhere nearby, a lonely sound. Finally, Michael stopped near the old oak tree, the one he used to climb when he was little. He turned to face me, and I could see he was struggling with something, working up courage. "I don't want to hurt you, Mom," he said quietly. "I really don't. But I need you to understand something. I need to make my own choices, my own mistakes even. I need to be my own person." I wanted to argue. I wanted to explain all the reasons why that was dangerous, why he still needed me, why letting go meant risking everything. But something in his eyes stopped me. "I'm scared," I heard myself say, and I was shocked by my own honesty. "I'm terrified that if I let go, something terrible will happen to you." "And I'm terrified," he said, his voice cracking just slightly, "that if you don't let go, I'll lose you completely. That this distance between us will just keep growing until we can't find our way back to each other." We stood there in the fading light, two people who loved each other desperately but couldn't figure out how to bridge the gap. I wanted to reach out, wanted to hug him, wanted to promise I'd change. But the words stuck in my throat, trapped behind years of fear and control. "I don't know how to do this differently," I finally admitted. "I don't know how to love you without protecting you." Michael's eyes were wet, and it broke my heart. "Maybe that's something we both need to figure out," he said softly. He left soon after, and I stayed in the backyard as the sun set, watching the sky turn from gold to purple to dark. The air grew cold, but I couldn't seem to make myself go inside. I felt trapped between two impossibilities: letting go and losing him, or holding on and losing him anyway. Somewhere in the gathering darkness, I heard myself whisper a prayer, though I wasn't sure what I was asking for. Help, maybe. Wisdom. The courage to change. The strength to trust. Or maybe just rest, the kind of rest Jesus promised to the weary. The kind I'd been seeking my whole life but never quite found, because I was too busy carrying everything myself, too afraid to let anyone else, even God, take the weight from my shoulders. 1 week later, at Sunday service, I almost didn't go, but something pulled me inside. Maybe habit, maybe desperation, maybe the tiniest sliver of hope. I slipped into my usual pew near the back. When Pastor Williams stepped up to preach, his face was kind, weathered by years of caring for this flock. "Today, I want to talk about what God does when our hearts are breaking," he said. He read from Psalm 34. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm chapter 34, verse 18. Something in my chest tightened. Close. The Lord is close. When was the last time I felt God was close? Is God truly near when I feel so alone? The question echoed in my mind as I listened. Pastor Williams told stories of people in the Bible whose hearts were shattered: David hiding in caves, the disciples after the crucifixion, and in every story, God drew near. Not to fix everything instantly, but to be present in the pain. God doesn't stand at a distance from our suffering, he said. He enters into it. He sits with us in the dark places. I felt tears prick my eyes. Could God really be near to me, even now, even with all this mess I'd made? A small flame flickered in my chest, too fragile to call hope, but something warmer than the emptiness I'd been carrying. For the first time in years, I felt maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. After the service, I walked toward the parking lot when I heard someone calling my name. Ruth, wait! Margaret Chin hurried toward me. We'd been friends years ago before life got busy. She had the same warm smile, but her eyes held something deeper now. I've been praying for you, she said, leading me to a bench under the oak trees. I heard about what happened with Michael. Ruth, I want to tell you something. 5 years ago, my daughter Emily stopped speaking to me for almost a year. I stared at her, shocked. I tried to control her, manipulate her, Margaret continued. I thought I was protecting her, but I was really protecting myself from the fear of losing her. It took hitting rock bottom before I realized I was trying to be God in her life instead of trusting God with her life. What changed? I whispered. I had to surrender completely. And Ruth, it was terrifying, but it was also the most freeing thing I've ever done. She smiled. Emily and I are talking now. It's not perfect, but it's real. Before I left, Margaret prayed for me right there on that bench. When she finished, I felt warmth spreading through my chest, like someone had lit a candle in a dark room. Maybe I wasn't alone in this after all, but that hope didn't last long. A few days later, at a midweek church meeting, I arrived early for coffee. That's when I heard them through an open door. Karen's voice. I just think Ruth needs to accept that Michael is an adult now. She's always been so intense about everything. Always had to be in control, Jim added. Michael told me he feels suffocated. If she'd just back off, maybe they could have a normal relationship. I stood frozen, the coffee growing cold in my cup. I forced myself to walk into the fellowship hall anyway. The room felt quiet when I entered, not completely silent, but a noticeable shift. My Aunt Linda looked up from arranging cookies on a table, offered a tight smile, then quickly turned back to her work. Uncle Tom was deep in conversation with the pastor, but when he glanced my way, he suddenly found his phone very interesting. I sat down at an empty table near the back. Around me, groups clustered together, laughing, sharing prayer requests, catching up on each other's lives. No one invited me to join them. It was like I was invisible, or worse, visible but unwanted. Why won't anyone see my pain? I thought. Is forgiveness even possible here when no one even acknowledges what's broken? Karen caught my eye from across the room. For a moment, I thought she might come over, might say something, but she just looked away and continued her conversation. I left before the meeting even started. All I could feel was crushing shame and isolation pressing down on me. That evening at my small group, I almost skipped it, but something made me go. When the leader, Beth, invited someone to read the passage, it was from Ephesians 4. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 31 through 32. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Bitterness, anger, rage. I had it all. Beth looked around the circle. So what does this kind of forgiveness look like? Not just saying the words, but actually letting go. After others shared, Beth turned to me. Ruth, you've been quiet. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about how hard it is to forgive when people don't even acknowledge they've hurt you, I said. Beth nodded. What if forgiveness isn't really about them at all? What if it's about setting yourself free from the bitterness that's poisoning your own heart? Something shifted inside me, like a door I'd been holding shut, suddenly loosening on its hinges. Could I forgive without an apology? Without justice? Without them understanding? Can I forgive those who hurt me? The question burned in my chest. What if forgiveness means losing my grip on safety? The thought terrified me, because forgiving meant letting go. And letting go meant giving up control. Or maybe it meant freedom. Later that night, the house was dark except for one lamp in the corner. It was past midnight, but I couldn't sleep. I sat alone in my living room with my phone in my hand. Michael had texted about plans for a 3-week road trip across the country. No concrete itinerary. Everything in me screamed to call him, to list all the dangers, to protect him. My finger hovered over his name. Just one call. But I stopped. Instead, I set the phone down on the coffee table and closed my eyes. The house settled around me. The tick of the wall clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car passing outside. I whispered into the darkness, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to stop protecting. I don't know how to trust that you'll take care of him when I'm not in control. Can I trust God enough to stop controlling? The question had been circling my mind all day. What does surrender look like for me? The words from the sermon came back. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And from my morning reading, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Take my yoke, not carry both, mine and his, just his. I sat there for a long time, feeling the battle rage inside me. Control or surrender? Fear or faith? Finally, I picked up my phone, but instead of calling Michael, I texted him, have a wonderful trip, be safe, I love you. Such a small thing, but it felt monumental. And in the quiet that followed, I felt a peace I didn't understand. Not because my fear was gone, but because I'd chosen to let God carry it. Several days later, my cousin David invited me to a family gathering. After overhearing Karen and Jim, facing everyone made my anxiety spike. But I went anyway. The house was full of noise, kids running around, adults talking in the kitchen. I felt out of place, like I was wearing a sign that said, failure. We gathered around the dinner table, conversation flowing around me. Then Karen said, So, Ruth, how's Michael doing? The table went quiet. I took a breath. Actually, I need to say something. I know you've all been talking about me, about my relationship with Michael, and I know you think I'm too controlling. Karen's face flushed. Jim looked down. And maybe you're right, I continued, but I need you to understand. I've been terrified of losing him. And instead of dealing with that fear, I tried to control everything. I thought that was love, but I'm starting to realize it was really just fear. The room was silent. I'm not asking you to agree with everything I've done, but I am asking you to stop whispering about me. If you have something to say it to my face. Let's be honest with each other. Even if it's hard. David spoke first. Thank you for saying that, Ruth. That took courage. Karen's eyes were wet. I'm sorry. I should have talked to you directly. It wasn't perfect. There was still tension, still hurt. But it was a start. I drove home feeling nervous but strangely empowered. I'd taken a risk. I'd been honest. And the world hadn't ended. But later that night, alone in my bedroom, the adrenaline faded. In the silence, all the fear came rushing back. Had I just ruined everything? Would they ever forgive me for calling them out? What if Michael heard about it and pushed further away? What if I'd burned the last bridges I had left? The digital clock on my nightstand read 11:47. The room was dark except for the pale moonlight filtering through the curtains. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my clothes from the gathering, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. And then I collapsed. I fell forward onto the bed and sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for Michael, for the distance between us. I cried for my family, for all the hurt we'd caused each other. I cried for myself, for the years I'd wasted trying to be in control instead of trusting God. I can't do this anymore, I gasped between sobs, my face pressed into the pillow. Jesus, I can't. I'm so tired. I've tried so hard and it's all falling apart anyway. The words poured out of me like a confession. I'm afraid. I'm so afraid of losing him. I'm afraid of not being enough. I'm afraid that if I let go, everything will fall apart. I'm afraid you won't catch us. Can I truly surrender my fears to Jesus? What does forgiveness look like when it hurts this much? I lay there in the dark, my tear-streaked face wet against the pillow, my chest heaving with quiet sobs, feeling more vulnerable and exposed than I'd ever felt in my life. And in that brokenness, in that moment of total surrender, I heard, not with my ears, but deep in my spirit, a whisper, "I've been waiting for you to give me your burden. I've been here all along, wanting to carry what you couldn't carry alone." I didn't have answers. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have control. But for the first time, I felt like maybe that was okay. Maybe I didn't need to have it all figured out. Maybe I just needed to take the next step in faith, whatever that looked like, and trust that God would meet me there. A few days later, I sat across from Sarah Mitchell at a small coffee shop downtown. Sarah had been my mentor years ago, and when I'd called her, she'd agreed to meet immediately. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows. The air smelled rich with dark roast and vanilla. Sarah wrapped her hands around her mug and looked at me with steady eyes. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her eyes, kind but unflinching, held mine with steady compassion. "Tell me what's going on," she said. So I did. I told her everything. The Christmas dinner, Michael pulling away, my desperate attempts to control, the fear driving it all. Sarah just listened, her expression full of compassion. When I finished, she opened her Bible to Romans 8 and read, "The Spirit you received does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father, Father." The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. Romans chapter 8, verses 15 through 17. She looked up at me. "Who are you in God's eyes, Ruth?" Who was I? A failure? A controlling mother? "I'm his child," I whispered. "Yes," Sarah said gently. "You're his beloved child, not a slave to fear, not defined by your mistakes, already loved, already accepted, already free." Something cracked open in my chest. Can I live as God's beloved child, not a fearful controller? "The fear that's been driving you," Sarah continued, "it's understandable, but it's not who you are anymore. You don't have to earn safety through control. Jesus already secured that for you." Tears ran down my face. "I don't know how to be different." "You don't have to figure it all out today," she said. "Just take the next step. Trust him with the next moment. He'll meet you there." When I left that coffee shop, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because everything was fixed, but because I'd been reminded who I actually was. When I got home that afternoon, I went into my home office and saw a manila envelope on my desk. My name was written on it in Karen's handwriting. Inside was a letter, not from Karen, but from Michael. The date at the top made my heart stop. 3 years ago. I sank into my desk chair and read, "Mom, I'm writing this because I don't know how else to say it. I love you, but I feel like I'm suffocating. Every decision I make, you question. I know you're scared of losing me, but I'm scared too. Scared that if things don't change, we won't have any relationship at all. I want you to trust me." I gave this letter to Aunt Karen 3 years ago and asked her to give it to you when the time was right. "I don't want to lose you. I just need room to breathe." My hands shook. 3 years. Karen had kept this from me for 3 years. How long has this truth been hidden? Michael hadn't just suddenly pulled away at Christmas. He'd been trying to tell me for years, and the family had known. I thought about Ephesians 4. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 31 through 32. I could feel the anger rising, but underneath it was something else, a chance. Can transparency heal the broken family narrative? I knew what I had to do. A week later, I sat in a small meeting room at the church with Pastor Williams, Karen, Jim, and Michael. The room felt tense. I took a breath and pulled out the letter. Michael wrote this 3 years ago, I said. I watched Karen's face go pale. Michael looked shocked. I'm not sharing this to shame anyone, I continued. I'm sharing it because I'm done with secrets. I'm done with control. I looked at Michael. You were right. About all of it. I was suffocating you. I thought I was protecting you, but I was really protecting myself from fear. I'm sorry. His eyes were wet. I turned to Karen and Jim. I love you both. But the gossip, the secrets, it has to stop. We can either deal with things honestly, or we can keep pretending and watch this family fall apart. I knew what I was risking. Am I willing to suffer loss for true peace? Some of them might never forgive me for this honesty. But I couldn't keep living in the shadows of fear and secrets. Michael spoke, his voice thick. Mom, I just needed you to see me as an adult, not a child you had to control. I see you now, I said, and I'm choosing to trust you, because you're God's child too, and He loves you even more than I do. Pastor Williams spoke quietly. This is what grace looks like. It's costly, it's hard, but it's the only path to real healing. Karen's tears streamed. I'm sorry, Ruth. I should have given you the letter right away. I forgive you, I said, and I meant it. We talked for another hour, messy, honest, painful conversation. Not everything was resolved, but something had shifted. Can God's grace truly renew this family? I was beginning to believe it could. As we stood to leave, Michael walked over to me. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then he pulled me into a hug. A real hug, not the stiff, obligatory kind we've been doing for years. Thanks, Mom, he whispered, for being brave enough to do this. Several months later, I woke early and reached for my Bible. The house was quiet, peaceful, no longer jolted awake by anxiety or racing thoughts. I sat up slowly and looked around my bedroom. The morning light was soft through my curtains, golden and warm. My Bible lay on the nightstand where I'd left it the night before, its worn cover familiar and comforting. I opened to Matthew 11 and read slowly, letting the words sink in. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Rest. I finally understood, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of peace. Not controlling everything, but trusting the one who did. I closed my eyes and prayed, not desperately, but gratefully. Thank you, Jesus, for carrying what I couldn't carry, for teaching me that surrender isn't weakness, for showing me what rest really means. I sat there for a few more moments in the quiet morning, feeling the peace settle over me like a warm blanket. This was so different from those anxious mornings months ago when I'd read the same verses but couldn't feel their truth. Now I could rest in them. That evening, Michael came over for dinner. We sat at the same table where everything had fallen apart at Christmas, but now it felt different. The late afternoon sun streamed through the dining room windows, casting everything in warm light. So tell me about the road trip, I said, passing him the potatoes. What was the best part? His face lit up as he told me about the national parks, the unexpected detours, the small towns he'd discovered. I listened, really listened, without mentally cataloging dangers or thinking about what could have gone wrong. He paused, mid-story, about a sunrise in the Grand Canyon. You're actually listening, he said, surprised. I'm trying. I said with a small laugh. It's a process. He smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen in years. I caught myself about to ask if he'd been careful with his money, if he'd checked his tire pressure, but I stopped. Instead, I asked, what did the sunrise look like? His smile grew wider. Mom, it was incredible. I wish you could have seen it. Maybe next time we could go together, I said. The word surprised me as much as him. I'd like that, he said softly. After dinner, we sat on the back porch, watching the sunset. The silence between us wasn't tense anymore. It was comfortable. I'm proud of you, Mom, Michael said quietly. I know how hard this has been. The hardest thing I've ever done, I admitted, but also the most freeing. A week later at my small group, Beth asked if anyone had anything to share. I've been learning about forgiveness, I said. The group turned to me, and I saw Margaret smile encouragingly from across the circle. For years, I held on to control because I was afraid. But God's been teaching me that real forgiveness means releasing people from the burden of being what I need them to be. I opened my Bible. Ephesians 4 says, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you." Ephesians chapter 4, verses 31 through 32. Just as Christ forgave us completely and freely. That's what I'm learning to do, I continued. With my son, with my family, with myself. To forgive the way Christ forgave. Margaret reached across the circle and squeezed my hand. Thank you for sharing that, Ruth, she said quietly. Around the circle, I saw others nodding. One woman had tears in her eyes. I needed to hear that today, she whispered. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me for sharing. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It was part of God's bigger story of redemption. Later that week, I stood in my backyard at sunset, the same place where Michael and I had that painful conversation months ago. The sky was painted orange and pink. I thought about everything that had changed. The control I'd released, the fear I'd surrendered, the relationships slowly healing. I thought about Romans 8, about being God's beloved child, not a slave to fear, but an heir with Christ, empowered to live in freedom. Romans chapter 8, verses 15 through 17. Not defined by failures, just loved, just free. Where am I holding on too tightly? Even now, there were still areas where my fingers gripped too hard, moments when fear whispered that I needed to take charge. But I knew the answer wasn't more control, it was more surrender. Can I surrender my fears to Jesus today? Not just once, but daily. I whispered a prayer. Jesus, thank you for teaching me that true love doesn't control, it trusts. Help me to live as your beloved child, free from fear, resting in your care. The wind picked up, and I felt that familiar peace. Not because everything was perfect. Michael and I still had hard days. My family still had tension. But I was learning to trust, learning to rest. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. If you're listening and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're holding on too tight out of fear, I want you to know you're not alone. There's a better way. Jesus invites you to come to him and find rest, real rest. Not through perfect control, but through surrender, through remembering that you're his beloved child and he's already holding everything. Where are you holding on too tightly today? What fears are driving you? Who do you need to forgive? Talk to Jesus right now. Tell him you're tired of carrying it all. Ask him to teach you what it means to rest in his care. And then take one small step. Maybe it's a conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's releasing control over someone you love. Maybe it's just acknowledging you can't do this alone. Whatever it is, take that step and trust that Jesus will meet you there.